This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. I grew up in a small town in Kansas. We've always had our secret, and we've had even unsolved murders. But today we're going to a small farm in Indiana, property of Herb Baumeister, where he allegedly murdered at least 11 men. Today we have Richard Estep, author of the book, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farms, Unraveling the History and Hauntings of his Serial Killer's Home. We're going to dive into the story of this tragic case and explore the paranormal encounters that continue to this day, and we'll get to know the psyche of the suspected murderer and the terrifying supernatural activities that linger in the aftermath of such an unspeakable evil. That's part of his bio of the book, and I'm so excited to dive in today. So I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, author Richard Estep. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Tony. How are you?
I'm great, and I hope I said your last name right.
Estep.
Estep? Oh, that's easy enough. Well,
not too difficult.
Right? Well, you'd be surprised with the last name of Sweet how many people get that wrong, and I'm like, I'm not for sure how you get that wrong, but we'll move on from there. Well, I'm excited to talk about your book, and I have to say congratulations because you have multiple books. I don't know, you look fairly young, so I don't know how you've had time to write that many. But the book today, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farm, I'm curious because, you know, many of us, we watch Netflix and Hulu and many other streaming platforms, you know, and even Unsolved Mysteries, how many mysteries of serial killers and murders for some reason fascinate the human beings. First of all, you know, what's your take on why the fascination of serial killers and just murder mysteries?
Well, I think, and you're absolutely right. We are fascinated by murder and serial killers. I think there's an element in many people that like to think, I would have spotted that guy. If he was living next door to me, if I shook hands with him, you know, I would have been able to tell. Or even would I have been able to tell? Right. And I think there's a fascination with that. You know, what is it about these apparently ordinary looking men and occasionally women? Are there tells? Are they giveaways? Is there something that could have been seen? And would I have been able to see that? You know? Right. And I also think there is a degree of, in some cases at least, I hate to say it, but it is a safe way to vicariously experience fear. It's mystified me why serial killers have fans. You know, as opposed to those
Same here.
Who are interested. You know, there's nothing wrong whatsoever with being interested in true crime, finding it fascinating as a field of study. Nothing wrong with that at all. It gets a little strange to me when serial killers have self-professed fans. And indeed, some of them have gotten groupies, you know.
It's true.
And my theory on that is that it's a completely safe fear for some individuals that they can be exposed to these monsters and live vicariously. They know that Richard Ramirez or John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy, they're not coming home with you. They're behind bars. They're not coming out to get you. And so I think it's a safe way for people to explore the horrors of the real world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you on that. And when I was a young boy, probably around nine years old, so probably late 70s, I had a cousin that she got divorced. She had 2 kids. She ended up getting murdered. Come to find out that her ex-husband that was in the military, he lived on a military base in, I believe, Arizona. She was in Winfield, Kansas. He drove all the way up to Winfield, Kansas, murdered my cousin. The neighbor apparently heard the screams. She had a gun, went over. He ended up getting the gun away from the neighbor, murdered her, killed her, and then drove back to Arizona the same night and eventually got caught. We always, we can't ever understand, some of us like, okay, we get mad at people, and, I just want to smack you. But we never got to that point of wanting to murder somebody. Well, there's murdering somebody, and then there's serial killers. So that instant anger of, it was a mishap, I killed somebody, I regret it. Many serial killers don't have remorse. So what is your take on the difference between a serial killer and then somebody that just happens to get mad one day and murder somebody with regret?
Well, first of all, let me express my my sorrow and sympathy for what your cousin went through. That's
yes,
awful, and I'm sorry that happened to her. I think that the study of serial killers, many of them, they kill once, and sometimes they don't intend to. The man we'll be talking about on this podcast, Tony, Herb Baumeister,
right.
Is one such example. And sometimes that first kill is accidental. And then they realize that they get away with it. They're fully expecting for a period of time afterwards that knock on the door, the police to turn up. And when that doesn't happen, they realize not only did they get away with murder, but they really love that fact. They get off on having gotten off with a crime, and then they set out to do it again. So it does make me wonder how many potential serial murderers are out there that never step over that line. And everybody has a line to kill somebody else, I think that everybody can be pushed that far once, or at least once. But what we're talking about here, we're differentiating with individuals that do this regularly and repeatedly because they have this compulsion to do so. And that's a different animal than the crime of passion, than the crime of self-defense or the other reasons somebody might kill on one occasion.
Well, and this is leading into, your investigation of writing many of your books, but this book in particular, we're talking about Herb Baumeister, and I'm going to show a picture of him. I mean, like you said, looks like kind of a normal guy. I would, nothing threatening, nothing too like suspicious of, doing any harm. Can we start from the beginning of his journey of becoming a very serious serial killer?
Absolutely. So to all outwards appearances, Herb was a regular guy. And you hear this so often. Most serial killers don't look like a Jeffrey Dahmer. They don't look obviously monstrous. They look like bank clerks and accountants and bartenders and so forth. Monsters in the real world seldom twirl mustaches and look like monsters. They don't have horns and tails. And so, he was an ordinary looking guy. He was married, had a couple of kids, made his living with a chain of thrift stores in Indiana, the Save-A-Lot chain of thrift stores, and had purchased this beautiful home called Fox Hollow Farm in the town of Carmel, which was about 17.5, 18 acres, something along those lines.
Nice.
Now, what's interesting is that prior to this, there have been a number of murders along the interstate, always young men. They were almost always found strangled in a state of some undress, often with their pants pulled down, dumped by the side of the road. And so, you have this name, the I-70 Strangler, who was never caught. That MO was very similar to Herb Baumeister's MO. So what he would do was that when his wife and children were away for the weekend, usually, they had a lake house quite a distance away. Herb would have the place to himself. He would assume this persona. He had a pseudonym that he liked to use. This idea that he was a different man called Brian Smart, I believe it was. And he would go into Indianapolis to gay clubs, gay bars. Now we're talking about the 1990s here, when the gay scene was still somewhat fringe,
right,
compared to what it is today. And he would tell men that he approached he was a construction worker, and that he was working on this house that was so cool because it had a swimming pool in the basement, and that he had some drink and he had some drugs, and would the young man like to come back with him and party? Now, serial killers quite commonly target those on the margins of society, be they the homeless, be they the addicted, be they sex workers, or people to any kind of minority group, because tragically, those are the people that are so rarely missed. You know, if Herb Baumeister had been murdering young men from fraternities, he would have been caught much sooner, I suspect. But anyway, so that story, that's a very attractive offer if you're a young man who is either homeless or verging on it, couch surfing. And so people would take him up on it. Men would take him up on it. He had a Jaguar that he drove. He was a sports car aficionado. He would drive them back to Fox Hollow Farm, and it has this, as you saw in the picture that you showed, the aerial photograph, a very long winding driveway.
Yeah.
Which the picture doesn't really do it justice. It just goes on and on and on and on. And this is an older picture that you see that the woods at the back of the farm there used to come even closer to the back of the house.
Oh, wow.
So the woods abutted the back of the house at the 12 o'clock position there. So Herb would take them, these young men, down into the basement where he had a wet bar and a swimming pool. And, you know, Tony, he had prepped before he went out. So what he would do, he would bring the pool cover across and he would crank the heat up to maximum before he went out on the town. And so imagine this is basically like a saucepan full of boiling water simmering, you know?
Oh, wow.
Just cooking away under there. And there are these big French doors that lead onto the pool room. So he and the young man would get into the pool. Herb would roll back the pool cover, releasing all of this hot air, open the French doors so that you get cool air coming in from outside. And of course, that would create a great deal of steam.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine these conditions. It's very visually disorientating in there. It's full of steam. You can't see much. To make things stranger still, he had a number of mannequins, shop window dummies, dressed in beachwear, so bikinis, Hawaiian shirts, shorts, things like that. He had this pool party staged with mannequins all around the pool.
Oh,
fake
wow.
Plum trees, you name it. And that's when he would get into the pool with the young man, would give them alcohol, would ply them with drugs, intoxicants of various descriptions, would have sexual intercourse with them, but was very keen on autoerotic asphyxiation, inviting them to strangle him and then strangling them. So it's been theorized, and there's no proof of this, but it's a reasonable hypothesis, I think, that the first time Herb Baumeister discovered that he enjoyed strangling men during sex, that he perhaps went too far, didn't mean to kill, did, and now he's done it, right? Now he's got to dispose of the body, which he probably did at the side of the road, and waits for the knock on the door from the police, which never comes. And so he does it again and gets a taste for it. And the reason that I'm mentioning these earlier murders, Herb Baumeister was never tried, let alone convicted of any murders. He is still technically an alleged serial killer.
Oh, really?
But the murders along the interstate stopped when the Baumeisters moved into Fox Hollow Farm.
Now, what did Herb do as a job?
So as I said, he owned and operated a chain of discount thrift stores.
So was this something that he purchased on his own? Was this like inherited from his family?
He built this business up along with his wife, who worked in the stores, and was doing fairly well at first. But towards the end of his life, the finances, along with Herb's marriage, began to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
And Julie Baumeister, Herb's wife, always denied knowing anything about the murders. And I can't speak to that. She would eventually go on Oprah to talk about the fact that she was as blindsided by this as everybody else. But there was certainly a gulf between her and her husband, and she would say that she'd seen him naked just a handful of times during their entire marriage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I will say in Julie's defense, if you're married and your partner is acting strangely, the first or even the fifth or 10th conclusion you jump to probably isn't that they're killing people.
Probably having an affair or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's some plausibility there for sure. But Herb would, once the young men had been strangled to death, he would lay the bodies in his pump room in the pool for a while. Those are the doors that I talked about that would be open to let in that cool air. And then he would drag them out into the woods, and you see how much closer the trees are there.
Yeah, very close.
You can see that the woods at the back of the house basically come right up to it. He dragged the bodies out into the woods. Sometimes he would dismember them, try to burn them, dispose of them in various ways. But crucially, he never buried them. He never buried a single body, which you would think would make the police's job easier when he was discovered. But in fact, it didn't. The way that Herb finally got caught, well, young men were disappearing in Indianapolis from the gay community. There were posters. There were descriptions of Mr. Smart, his alias. And yet private detectives were involved, as well as the actual police detectives also. What finally got him caught was that Herb's son one day came to his, it's macabre, and I shouldn't laugh, but it is a funny image, comes out of the woods with a big stick and a skull. And his sister is upstairs in her bedroom. And what does a brother do but torment his sister, right? So he puts the skull on a stick and waves it up above her window until she notices this floating skull, screams, pandemonium. Mom says, "What's going on? What's all this commotion? Where did you get that skull?" And Herb's son said, "I found it in the woods back here. There's a whole bunch of bones." And sure enough, there were. Wow. So really, this was the moment when, if the police had been called, this might all have ended. The account went that when Julie confronted Herb with it, he basically said it was his father's skeleton from medical school. And that he had just thrown it out back, and don't worry, I'll get rid of it. What he actually was doing, though, was disposing of more and more sets of human remains.
Wow.
It was a bone field. And finally, when he was caught, the detectives came and just found thousands of bones and bone fragments, because the critters, Fox Hollow, foxes, raccoons, you name it, had scattered the bodies and the bones and the pieces far and wide. And parts still turn up there to this day, sadly. Herb had heard that the police were at his house with a warrant, so he made a run for it. He drove for the Canadian border, crossed the border into Canada, so eluded the authorities in the U.S., went to a very pretty national park and found a place overlooking the water. And he prepared himself his favorite meal, which was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, wrote a suicide note, and in this note made no allusion whatsoever, no reference to the murders. He apologized for how his life had fallen apart, but was more worried about his failing business and his failings in his personal life. No mention of murder at all. Then took his pistol and shot himself in the head.
Wow. You know, I'm from Kansas. Like I said earlier, in Wichita, we had the BTK Strangler.
Dennis Rader.
And so we also had, like you said, John Wayne Gacy. A lot of times these serial killers taunt the police and local authorities, because they, like you said, they get away with it, and it's almost like they want to get caught, but they don't want to get caught. Since he, didn't really get to kind of investigate him face to face and, interrogate him, did he ever, because it sounds like if he's just throwing bones in the backyard pretty much in the woods, because, people are going to go through the woods, it's almost careless in a way.
Well, carelessness is a trait of many serial killers. They get complacent.
Yeah.
You know, you tend to find that once you kill the first individual, that's when they take maximum care and maximum caution. When they're on the 10th and they're into double digits, having gotten away with it so many times, it's become routine for them.
Right.
You know, it really has. And so disposing of the remains becomes less and less of a priority for some of them. And really, the ones that don't get complacent are the ones that tend not to get caught. The ones that get caught are those that slip up. Gacy was caught because he allowed a victim to live. And the victim remembered his car and was able to stake out the actual freeway exit that Gacy took him from. That's how they got him. And Gacy was, as you said, openly taunting the police.
Oh,
the detectives that were tailing him, he sent them drinks. He would go sit with them. So Herb was not a confrontational guy. But one interesting thing, I don't know if you have the capacity to pull up a piece of footage from YouTube, Tony.
Let's see what we can do.
If you can, there is a piece of video out there that takes about 2 minutes. It's a news report, but it illustrates what we're talking about extremely well. So let me know if you have YouTube up.
Is that the one
Google
where he's
the words Herb Baumeister interview, and you'll see interviews with Herb Baumeister from Wish TV, WISH TV.
Yes,
it's like a very short segment, just a minute. Could you play that for?
Yeah, let me get through the commercial.
Yeah, and so before you do that, what you're going to see is Herb himself standing at Fox Hollow Farm, okay, being interviewed about what he says is something outrageous. Let's run that video, Tony, and then talk afterwards.
All right, so let me get this on here real quick. And here we go.
The Indiana Department of Transportation maintains over 11,000 miles of roadway, and we paint those miles of roadway each year. And this is just an isolated incident that happened.
The drive-by striping, whatever.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with the spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. So I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot at the thing.
A raccoon, which met its demise on the yellow line, became one with the paint. The raccoon has since been removed. This is all that's left.
This was just, the painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. The poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
So just what is the explanation for this? For that, we went to the State Highway Department itself.
The Indiana Department of Transportation feels like this is a...
Okay, so we can stop there. So what we just saw was Herb outraged, or at least
over a raccoon.
A raccoon that had been spray painted over, and its dead body was treated disrespectfully by a road painting crew. Now, in the background, just off camera, are the woods in which Herb has dumped, at that time, who knows how many dead bodies of young men that he had murdered and assaulted, So you'll notice he's laughing, he's smirking. I had a chance to interview somebody who knew him very well indeed. And I asked him about that piece of footage, and he said, Herb is getting off on the fact that I know this. I have this secret. I have you looking at me on the one hand, and my other hand is, doing this. It was all smoke and mirrors. So he was vicariously outsmarting everybody. The guy called the traffic highway department to complain about abuse of a raccoon, a dead raccoon. Now, I'm not downplaying that, but when you've murdered, anywhere up to 19 young men and desecrated their bodies, cut them up, set them on fire, the fact that you would complain about that is the very definition of hypocrisy, isn't it?
Yeah, it just baffles me because, when you meet somebody and you get to know them, you start to, like, oh, this is a pretty good guy or girl, whatever, and you start to have feelings or even just feelings of friendship or feelings of compassion or something. It baffles me that, somebody that seems so normal that would not have a compassion to, even if it's a sexual encounter, to not have the feelings to say this is not right. That's where you're like, I guess as human beings, we're like, how does somebody get to that point? Can we go back? And I don't know if you did the investigation of going back to his growing up, before married, before kids. What was his life like? Was he openly gay? Was he always in the closet? Did he come from an abusive home? What was your research?
Herb was never openly gay at any point in his life. He was known as, one thing that's interesting, having talked about him extensively, is that people who knew him would nickname him Weird Herb. They'd say this was a guy that would give you his last dollar, he'd give you the shirt off his back, and then they would say, but he was weird,
Wow.
And that was a consistent theme. And he'd done some things that, as a younger man, that definitely were not normal. Having turned up to work at the DMV, I believe it was one day, and urinated on his boss's desk.
Oh my God.
Things of that nature. And so, yeah, there were definitely, and of course, some of the details when you're dealing with minors are not easy to access. But there was definitely mental health. There were definitely mental health issues in his upbringing. But as far as we know, his family life, his upbringing, was not some horror story of abuse and torture and molestation. As far as we know, there were no massive, obvious red flags in his upbringing, or even in his later life, really, that would have made people think he would turn out this way.
Because I mean, I don't know if you got, I'm sure you did get to see the Netflix of Jeffrey Dahmer story. Wow. I mean, not that makes you, forgive him or give him an excuse to do what he did, but, definitely he came from a very tortured, childhood. But I always say that, a lot of us come from families that didn't have the best growing up, but we didn't end up becoming serial killers. So, yeah.
I think with a serial killer, the great debate is nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
And I suspect there are elements of both with most of them. And as you pointed out, there are people who come from far worse upbringings,
right,
that are able to not only survive that trauma, but they become some of the most caring and comforting and nurturing individuals.
Right.
They don't want anybody else to suffer what they've suffered. And then there is the opposite side of the coin, of course, those people that want others to suffer as they have. So in Herb's case, if there was a truly abusive childhood, I've been unable to uncover evidence of that. I think that there are a number of factors which had to align for him to do what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that once he started down that path, he was unable to stop himself from doing it. A compulsion kicked in, which drove him to his death.
This picture here, like you said, this was a little later. It looks like there's other homes around the home. Is that like a cul-de-sac of homes, or is?
No, you could easily think that, couldn't you? No, what you're seeing in the 4 o'clock position there is the 3-car garage. Actually.
Oh, wow.
To the 8 o'clock position, the stable block is over there. This is a farm that's designed for people that are horse riders, equestrians. So no, now the woods were much thicker and much denser then. Herb could easily have walked out bare naked into the woods to dispose of bodies, to cut them up, and nobody would have seen him at all. Now there are indeed houses. I wrote this book 4 years ago, I believe it was, and had started investigating at Fox Hollow Farm 5 or 6 years ago. And so there were housing settlements much closer to the farm. Now, actually, half of the land has been sold for development. So they are building or have built houses on Fox Hollow Farm today.
What was it like? I couldn't imagine going to the town, reaching out to family members, and a lot of times people don't want to bring up the past to talk about something so traumatic in their life. How do you approach family and friends and even a town that necessarily they don't want to talk about something that tragic?
I didn't approach any members of the Baumeister family. They have not indicated any willingness to be involved with discussing Herb, and I respect that right. You know, I have a great deal of sympathy for the Baumeister family, and so I didn't even approach them, to be frank. What really worried me about writing this book was that I did not want to upset the relatives or the next of kin of any of Herb Baumeister's victims.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I felt compelled to try and tell some of the Fox Hollow story, though, was that these poor young men who suffered terribly at Herb Baumeister's hands are effectively unremembered. Their remains right now, as we speak, are in storage. They have had no funerals, and they're incomplete and always will be. Parts of them remain scattered in those woods and in that vicinity far and wide. So I found that deeply upsetting. And when I'd heard that Fox Hollow Farm was haunted, I reached out to the owner and asked if I could come visit. Could I come investigate, which is primarily what I do when I'm working on a book.
Right.
And they gave me the opportunity to do that on the understanding that if nothing happened, if we had no results, no findings, that's exactly what I would report. You know, I did not want any of the victims' loved ones, though, feeling that their own loved ones were suffering in any way, and I did not want to exploit this case. I wanted to tell the story as openly as I possibly could.
And what was your findings when it comes to the paranormal side of any hauntings? Did you take a psychic with you, or what type of investigations did you do?
I did engage a couple of different psychics who had some interesting findings. We focused most of our attention on the downstairs, the swimming pool and the wet bar, which the wet bar was essentially Herb's man cave. And some of the murders took place there, some took place in the swimming pool. So the activity at Fox Hollow began in the swimming pool, in fact, when Vicky Graves, who is the current owner, was vacuuming and had the power flex of her vacuum cleaner jerked out of the wall as if, you know, somebody very angrily pulled it out of its socket. That was the first clue when Rob and Vicky Graves had bought the house that it was haunted, or that strange things were happening there. The woods around, so there are 2 burn piles or body disposal locations, and one of them I wanted to focus my attention on because shortly after moving into the farm, Vicky saw the figure of a young man walking through the woods by one of those burn piles. And trespassing was a thing that the family had dealt with back then. There are people that are interested in the case, always have been. I can respect that, but not trespassing. So unfortunately, people would trespass on the property, and the police would have to be called, and that would have to be dealt with. So Vicky was just about to yell out at the young man when she realized, firstly, that he had no legs, and secondly, he disappeared into thin air right before her eyes.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I find that fascinating when souls, you know, many of them, there were young souls that definitely were not ready to leave this earth, and I'm sure still linger to not even realizing what's going on. Actually, I'm curious on any investigations that you do when you go into something where there's a murder. How do you prepare for that? Because I know a lot of psychics, they, sometimes say a prayer for protection, but do you do anything to protect yourself from an investigation like this?
I do have my own personal methods. Generally, I used to scoff at things like that, to be honest with you, Tony.
Right.
And as they say, pride goes before a fall. Right. So I actually had investigated the paranormal for almost a quarter century with no ill effects. And then something came home with me from one of my locations. To this day, I don't know which caused some issues around my house. Shadow figures, voices in empty rooms, objects falling from shelves, those kind of things, to the point where I actually had my house blessed. And after that, I started incorporating some simple techniques before going to a location and after leaving, which have stood me in fairly good stead. I think the key in any case, but doubly so in one like this, is respect. That you approach the location with respect. Naming no names, there are those individuals out there, many of them on TV, that like to puff out their chest and they like to go challenge, they're belligerent.
Right.
They behave in a way that you would not behave in that way with a living stranger that you just met. So why would you do it with someone that you believe is the departed soul of the dead? Why would you antagonize? Why would you bring ego into it? So my team and I, we brought some respect, courtesy, and humility. And I have to say also a healthy side dose of humor. You have a location that's very grim, very depressing in some ways. It's now a family home, though. The Graves family have made it their own. And when we wrap this up, we'll talk about how Fox Hollow is today, I think. But I believe that humor and positive emotions are the best way to combat the lingering negativity that can surround places like this. So we just friendly people, but there was also a lot of laughter. There was a lot of humor and things of that nature, which I think made all the difference.
I was looking, like Jeffrey Dahmer, it seems like many of them had somewhat of a type of, even Ted Bundy had his own type of, kind of seemed like to have his own type of women that he seemed to stalk and kill. Not necessarily, he may not have, but it just seemed that way. Did Herb, other than just a young gay man, because I was looking through, there's a few people that were like 45 and 42, which doesn't seem like somebody of his type, because most of them were like very young to 20 to early 30-year-olds. So did he actually have a type of person that he went after?
The type of person that would say yes to the question, do you want to come hang out in the house with a pool with the drugs and the booze?
Yeah.
I ideally, yes, he preferred younger men, what he regarded as prettier men. But by the same token, he would take what he could get.
Yeah.
And I think that when his goal was more about the domination, the gratification for him became, yes, it was sexual, but I also think that the thrill of taking a human life became something he found addictive and compulsive. I think the type was less important to him than the willingness to step into his realm, as it were.
So he had 3 children. He had at least one boy that I heard you say, one girl. So did he have 2 girls, 2 boys?
I believe it was 2 children, but I would have to check.
I was just looking on.
Don't take me as gospel. Like I said, it's been a few years since I was at Fox Hollow, but
well, it says 3, but I'm not. That could be wrong. So
he doted on his children. By all accounts, was a dad that liked to spoil his kids.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. He also, I found out, was a sleepwalker, which was interesting. Walked in his sleep throughout his life. So I think that when we're looking for the outward signs of this monster, and they just aren't really there. They aren't really that visible. Few people bat an eye at Herb Baumeister in public. He was that weird guy, that nice, sometimes weird guy.
Well, like I said, it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to hear the stories. where they came from, how they grew up, their family life. And it, like you said, it's almost like a complete different personality of many of the serial killers. But many of them are, have an oddness about, Jeffrey Dahmer was, had a oddness about him. Not all of them do, but, many do. And was he more of even though he was a business owner, was he more of like an introvert, extrovert?
Mm-hmm. He was very much, having talked to those who knew him well, he did not do confrontation. If you were to get into an altercation with Herb, a disagreement, raised voices, I was told, he would look down and leave the room rather than engage you in a, male to male. Very much not an alpha male.
Right. But that sounds like something growing up, becoming either an over-aggressive father or over-aggressive mother.
It's possible. The way in which he chose to kill, there was no shooting, no stabbing, no major bloodshed. This is in no way lessening, by the way, the severity of the crime. I'm not downplaying the fact that he murdered innocent men. It's reprehensible. But what I'm saying is that this wasn't somebody who enjoyed spilling blood,
right,
as it were. That was never his goal. He wasn't in this to cut somebody's throat or inflict injuries and see blood flow. He was in it for more of a sexualized and controlling reason.
Well, this is an interesting story. I thank you for putting together this book, The Horrors of Fox Hollow Farms, Unraveling the History and Hauntings of Serial Killers' Homes. How many books have you written on serial killers?
On serial killers specifically, I've written 2, which are true crime with no paranormal aspect to them. When it comes to the paranormal aspect of things, there's Fox Hollow Farm and my book about the Villisca axe murders, A Nightmare in Villisca, which looks at one of the great unsolved murder cases of the 20th century,
right?
Which almost certainly was carried out by a serial murderer.
Wow. Well, I know you have your website, Richard Estep, Estep.net, ESTEP.net. And when you go on there, there's just tons of books that are very fascinating, very interesting. That how did you, before we get out of here, how did you get into this fascination with all these amazing paranormal and serial killer stories?
Well, I grew up on, I had a love of ghost stories as a boy, and as a child of the 70s, there was no paranormal TV then. The kind of shows I'm on today did not exist. And so if you wanted to learn more about ghosts and hauntings, you went to the library. And so it gave me a deep love, not just of ghost stories, but of books in general.
Right.
So books are my happy place. And I'd investigated enough locations by 2014 when I started writing that I'd wanted to put some of that down. I wanted to write the kind of books I missed reading as a boy. And so those two passions dovetailed and came together. And I'm still going.
Do you have any new books coming out?
My latest is The Ghost That Saved America, which looks at the history and haunting of Fort Mifflin on the Delaware. It's a Revolutionary War era book. I'm currently working on a book about the haunting of Whispers Estate in Indiana, down in Mitchell, Indiana, down south. And a future project from your home state, Tony, Kansas. There will be a book about Atchison's The Sally House.
Yeah, I've heard of it. That's great. Well, I will definitely have to have you back talk about some of your other books. This is where, truth be told, this is what we're all about, and we're so fascinated with these topics, and many of your stories are just fascinating. So please, everybody, go to Richard's website. I'm sure you can get them on Amazon, but please support Richard and his amazing work of putting all these books together for us to be entertained and just give us that chill at night when we're trying to go to sleep and going, oh my gosh, we'll have to lock the doors extra hard, just trying to figure out what's coming next. So, but thank you, Richard, so much for being a part of Truth Be Told.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you to everybody that spent the last 45 minutes with us listening to our story. I appreciate you all.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being a part of Truth Be Told. You know, without you guys, there's no us, so we really appreciate you tuning in every Friday. I can't believe we've coming up on, I think, 12 or 13 years we've been doing this. And we have, other Truth Be Told shows. Richard maybe have to come on in one of our other shows, but he's going to have to come back to mine for sure. But Robert Hensley's on Monday with MINUTEMAN Report. Bonnie Burkert is on Wednesdays with Truth Be Told Transformation. And, of course, Metaphor is doing the Spanish version of the Latin version of Truth Be Told. So until next time, be well and take care of yourselves. And, again, thank you for support. Bye. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.